Hey guys, it's me, Mr. G. Welcome to American Traditions, and today we're going to be learning about the first Americans. So, when it comes to Native Americans, we have to understand that we are talking about a wide variety of different groups with different languages, cultures, religious beliefs and practices. Basically, they're different groups of people. Right? We've referred to them as tribes, that's how they were traditionally referred to, but we can look at them as different ethnic groups, different groups with different histories, different cultures, different languages, different styles of art. And so when we see Europeans arrive on the continent, they're not just arriving and finding one monolithic group, they're finding all these different groups. We see that when Europeans show up, they get mixed into this already complex web of different social groups, different treaties, different trade relationships in all these burgeoning Native American groups. And so the arrival of Europeans really was a catalyst, right? The Columbian Exchange began this turbulent period in Native American history and culture. It's transformative. It's hugely transformative. As we look across Native American cultures, obviously we're not looking at one monolithic group. One of the things that really differentiated the groups was where they lived. The lifestyle of these groups was oftentimes determined by the area that they lived, right? A lot of northwestern tribes fished salmon, and their culture really focused around smoking and curing fish for long periods of time. This is the groups that you see up here with the totem poles, right? That's very indicative of northwestern tribes. Compare that to the Plains Indians, who relied on bison hunting. The bison would provide not only meat, but the bones would be used for tools, the hides would be made into clothing and shelter, right? And so really, it was an important form of sustenance, especially in the Great Plains, where there's not a whole lot of anything else. If you've ever been out to the Great Plains, it's a lot of grass. Now it's a lot of corn. The Great Plains are the breadbasket of the United States. However, before, it was open prairie. In parts of the eastern United States where we see more fertile ground in our river systems near the Mississippi and other big waterways, we see agriculture and early civilization emerge. And so we know that agriculture emerged about 9,000 to 5,000 years ago. We know that Mesoamericans developed this in Central America, and they settled around crops like maize and corn and things like that. We see that in 1200 BC, this spread to areas around North America. The Americas, while abundant in all sorts of great crops, they were not universally spread around. One thing that was pretty ubiquitous, though, is what we've come to call the Three Sisters, right? These three crops, when grown in concert, constitute the bedrock of most Native American agriculture. The Three Sisters, as they're called, corn, beans, and squash, were these essential crops, especially in the eastern woodlands. You could support cities off of it, that they're complementary plants. And so the Native Americans learned that corn provides a structure. It provides almost like a trellis. Bean plants wrap around the corn and then are able to add beneficial nitrogen into the soil. Meanwhile, squash provide broad, shady leaves that prevents weeds from crowding out the corn and the beans and allows all three of them to harmoniously grow together. These groups had different cultures and languages, and because of that, you see different origin stories, right? So this obviously differs from the way Europeans saw the world, where most of Europe was part of what we would call Christendom, right? Coming from a Judeo-Christian background. Compare this to Native American cultures, where everyone had different origin stories, had different deities that they worship. Basically, the way that Native Americans got here was over the Beringia land bridge. They believe Native Americans crossed over from Asia into the Americas. And so we look at evidence from archaeologists, from anthropologists, and they show that, human civilization in the Americas, or human existence in the Americas, existed 14,000 years ago. These Native American cultures were not in any sense primitive, nor were they all hunter-gatherer cultures. Agriculture also led to social changes. This is why on the east coast of the United States, we see very complex networks of trade deals between different Native American tribes. We see lots of conflict between warring Native American tribes, and this is in part because territory became incredibly important to these tribes over time. The waterways of America have always served as trade. Even before the United States came in and was using the mighty Mississippi to move materials, Native Americans used it as a trade route. Rivers have long been the arteries of the Americas, moving goods and people across time and space. And so for Native Americans, this was no different. Native Americans traded goods up and down river and oftentimes formed alliances with different groups due to their proximity to one another, and hashed out deals as to who got what resources and what resources were shared. Right? Native Americans oftentimes traded materials like copper that could be used to make tools, flint and mica, obsidian, volcanic glass. Obsidian is volcanic glass, very strong, very sharp, right? And so these valuable materials were traded between communities. We found evidence of turquoise from the American Southwest as far east as modern-day Virginia. So this shows a very wide scope and range that these trading communities had. While we're talking about these tribes, it's important to look at their social structures, right? Many Native American tribes had distinct spiritual practices. Many of them were polytheistic. These cultures also practiced matrilineal kinship systems, where basically the mother determined your ancestral line. This is actually very similar to African societies, which were also matrilineal, as compared to Europe, which was a patrilineal system. And so concepts of property really differed from European norms, whereas Europeans understood that land could be owned. Really, you see in Native American cultures joint ownership of lands and really joint ownership of most property. Material goods were either deeply personal, like clothing, or they were very utilitarian to the unit, things like tools and weapons and things like the like. Oftentimes you had groups living in large structures like Iroquois longhouses. And so that meant that the idea of private property was relatively foreign to a lot of the different tribes. This matrilineal system also meant that women held significant influence. Women participated in agriculture, they ran households, and women even held leadership roles, which was quite different from European society at the time. Right? Nowadays, we take for granted that women participate in leadership roles, but in Native American cultures, it was a lot more common. Another differentiation between Europeans and Native Americans was in the concept of slavery. Native American slavery was not based on property or ownership of another person, but rather on kinship. Enslaved peoples could integrate into their new communities either through marriage or adoption. And so the idea was when a conquering tribe would take slaves from the other tribes, they would eventually be integrated into the society and become full and equal parts of that society. Now that being said, if you were not integrated, if you were not taken into the tribe, then you oftentimes met a very untimely end. And not necessarily a fun one either. Being scalped is no joke. So when we look at Native American civilizations, we kind of break them down into groups. The eastern woodlands saw groups like the Lenape, right? These Indians in the Delaware were matrilineal. You saw that oftentimes women were authoritative over marriage, households, and agricultures. Men took more public roles in society. These communities were stable and resistant. Unfortunately, most of the Lenape were killed due to exposure to smallpox and other European diseases. In the Pacific Northwest, we see a variety of groups. Like we said earlier, these groups relied on salmon as their staple food. This promoted sustainable harvesting practices and ensured salmon population survival. There were strict rules enforced about overfishing, and salmon took on the spiritual significance because of how important it was to life for these tribes. Chaco Canyon is a great example of Puebloan culture. So the Pueblo Indians is a wide variety of groups, from the Taos Pueblo Indians to Chaco Canyon to other Pueblo Indians. And so in the American Southwest, we see these structures, these cities, either built into canyons or built up on plateaus. The idea here being that in an area that is flat and barren, you want to build up where it's hard to get to, as well as keep away from the seasonal floods. You know, it doesn't rain much in the American Southwest, but when it does, canyons tend to flood, so you don't want to be at the bottom. And so we see Pueblo cultures like Chaco Canyon housed up to 15,000 people. This sophisticated architecture also came with agricultural practices in order to sustain them. Rainwater was collected and used in irrigation systems to grow crops in an otherwise arid area, right? And so eventually Chaco Canyon was abandoned by human beings. We believe this was due to ecological challenges like drought that led to the collapse of their society and the dispersal of these Puebloan groups into other tribal areas. I suggest, which led to the collapse and dispersal of these Puebloan cultures. So if you ever have a chance to go to the American Southwest, I would highly recommend, a little bit outside of Santa Fe is a city called Taos, and near Taos is Taos Pueblo, the oldest inhabited Puebloan structure in the United States. It's over 2,000 years old in terms of how long people have continuously been living there. It was a really cool experience, so I recommend you guys check it out if you're ever down there. All right. That being said, there were other major groups that had complex civilizations. Cahokia is probably the most pronounced example of an advanced civilization in North America. Right? Cahokia was the largest Mississippian settlement. It was founded along the Mississippi River. They had complex agriculture as well as large, complex architectural structures. With population that rivaled a lot of European cities at the time, Cahokia was quite possibly the largest civilization ever to exist in North America before the arrival of Europeans. Right? Certainly the largest civilization north of modern-day Mexico. Right? And so we know that Cahokia was organized around chiefdoms, and they were heavily interested in the stars and charting out time through celestial movements. Right? This seems to be a common thread along the Mayans, the Aztecs, and many ancient cultures. The Druids in ancient Europe, the ancient Greeks with their astrological signs. And so we see that this interest in stars, this interest in keeping track of time, it's sort of a universal human past. We would believe that Cahokia's decline was possibly due to ecological strain, deforestation, and things of that nature. Some argue that it was due to political turmoil and warfare. However, we don't really know. Archaeological evidence and anthropological evidence are kind of hard to come by when it comes to Cahokia. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. This has been Mr. G, and thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.